My name is Oscar Vance. According to the official paperwork, filed with the U.S. Forest Service, I am a seasonal fire lookout, assigned to Tower 4 in the sprawling, unnamed national forest that blankets this part of the country. That is my job title, my function. But it is not who I am. It is what I ran to when who I was became unbearable. Before this, I was a paramedic. For 6 years, I worked the chaotic streets of a city that never slept, a place where sirens were the official anthem. I saw the spectrum of human suffering, from the mundane to the horrific. I thought I had become immune to it, that I had built up a callus on my soul. I was wrong. The incident that broke me wasn't gory or spectacular. It was quiet. A 6-year-old girl, an asthma attack, a faulty inhaler. We arrived, I worked on her, and for a few minutes, I thought I had her. Then she was gone. The look in her mother's eyes as she watched me perform compressions on her daughter's tiny chest is a memory seared onto the back of my eyelids. After that, the city became a cacophony of ghosts. Every call was that call. Every child's face was hers. My hands, once steady, began to tremble. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, a clinical label for a shattered spirit. The prescribed therapy felt like placing a bandage on a gaping wound. The world was too loud, too full of people, too full of potential tragedies I was powerless to stop. I needed an escape, not a vacation, but a fundamental severing from the life I knew. The theme of escape is common for those who take this job. We are all running from something. The job posting seemed like a divine intervention, a lifeline thrown into the storm of my mind. Fire lookout, seasonal, it read. The list of duties was a litany of blessed solitude. Under general supervision, to watch from a lookout tower for fires, to make weather observations, to keep records. The special personal characteristics required were a mirror of my needs: willingness to work alone and in remote areas, to remain on duty 24 hours a day, as required. It was a job that demanded isolation, a position where the greatest danger seemed to be the months of complete boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer panic. For me, boredom was a sanctuary. Panic, I already knew intimately. The hiring process was surprisingly formal. A series of interviews, a background check, and a psychological evaluation I somehow managed to pass. They told me about the challenges, the loneliness that could crawl all over you, the weight of responsibility, the psychological test of being completely alone for months on end. I nodded, assuring them I was prepared. I didn't tell them that the loneliness they described as a challenge, I saw as the cure. I was seeking the very sensory deprivation others feared, a quiet so profound it might finally silence the ghosts. And so, I signed the papers. I packed my life into a few duffel bags, leaving behind the man who failed to save a little girl. I was helicoptered into the heart of the wilderness, watching the city shrink into a distant memory and then disappear altogether. As the chopper's blades beat their retreat, leaving me in a sudden, profound silence, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I was Oscar Vance, fire lookout, alone at the top of the world, ready to watch for fires. I had no idea I was also being watched. The first week passed in a haze of blessed monotony. The silence I had craved was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines and the crackle of the radio during my twice daily check-ins. My days fell into a simple, grounding rhythm: wake, make coffee, scan the horizon, record the weather, read, scan again. The forest was a vast, green and brown tapestry that stretched to every edge of the world. And I was the lone stitch holding it all together. The ghosts of the city, the wail of the ambulance, the 6-year-old girl's face. They began to fade, their edges softened by the sheer scale of the wilderness. I was healing, or so I thought. It was on the 8th day that I found the list. It was tucked inside the logbook, a single sheet of paper, folded and worn, the writing a frantic scrawl. At the top it said, Arlas far towar. Fa you are, Rod TM, Live YTM. This is not a joke. It was signed, Harvey. Harvey was my predecessor, the old-timer they'd mentioned who had retired abruptly. I'd figured the isolation had finally gotten to him. Now, reading his words, I wondered if it was something else. The rules were bizarre, nonsensical. Rule 1: do not leave the tower after sundown, no matter what you hear. Rule 20: if you see a fire that isn't there on the map, don't report it. It's not for you. Rule 30: sometimes the radio will call your name. It's not dispatch. Do not answer. Rule 4A: if you see a face in the trees, look away. Don't let it know you've seen it. Rule 50 at night: if you hear someone running up the stairs to your tower, turn on the main exterior light until morning. If you don't do this by the time she's at the top, it's too late. Rule 60: if you wake up and see the smiling woman staring at you through your window, hide under your covers and hold your breath. She will come into your hut. Do not breathe until she is gone. Rule 7Y: if you hear any scratching, turn off all radios and hide under your covers until it stops. Rule 80: do not acknowledge the children's laughter. Rule 90: if she gets in, run. Don't fight, just run. Find the bunker. I laughed, a dry, rusty sound in the quiet of the cupola. It was clearly a prank, a bit of hazing for the new guy. Or maybe it was the final testament of a man whose mind had been unraveled by solitude. The psychological toll of this job was well documented. Loneliness can make the mind play tricks, conjuring hallucinations and paranoia from the ether of sensory deprivation. I folded the paper and put it back, dismissing it as a curiosity. That night, the scratching started. It was faint at first, like a branch scraping against the wooden legs of the tower. I ignored it, but it grew louder, more deliberate. Scry-ape. Pause. Scry-ape. It sounded like long fingernails being dragged slowly down a wooden board. It moved, circling the base of the tower, then starting up the stairs. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I thought of the list, of Rule 7. Turn off all radios and hide under your covers. It was absurd. This was a raccoon, a porcupine. But the sound, it was rhythmic, patient. The scratching stopped at my door. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. A long, agonizing silence, and then it was gone. I didn't sleep much that night, my ear tuned to every creak of the old tower. 2 nights later, I was jolted from a shallow sleep by a new sound. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of bare feet, slapping against the metal stairs, coming up fast. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. My mind screamed, "It's not real. It's my PTSD, a nightmare." But the sound was undeniable, growing louder, closer. The list. Rule 5. Turn on the main exterior light. My hand was shaking so violently, I could barely grip the bed frame. It was a choice between my rational mind and the frantic scrawl of a man I'd never met. The running was halfway up the tower. With a strangled cry, I lunged across the small room and slammed my palm down on the large, industrial light switch. A powerful floodlight blazed to life, bathing the catwalk and the surrounding treetops in a stark, artificial glare. The running stopped. Instantly, I stood frozen, my back pressed against the wall, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the generator and the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. I crept to the window, peering down into the blinding light. The stairs were empty. The forest was still. But I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that something had been there. I left the light on until the sun rose, a pale, sickly yellow in the morning sky. The forest no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, watchful. During the day, I scanned the horizon for smoke, my eyes also darting nervously toward the tree line. Was that a shadow moving, or just the wind? Was that a pale shape between the trunks, or a patch of birch bark? Rule 4. If you see a face in the trees, look away. The paranoia was a living thing, a vine tightening around my chest. I started talking to myself, just to break the oppressive quiet. My professional calm, the armor I had worn for years as a paramedic, was cracking. I considered calling it in, but what would I say? Tower 4 to dispatch. I think a ghost is trying to climb my stairs. Over. They'd pull me for a psych evaluation so fast my head would spin. They'd say the isolation had broken me. Maybe it had. Maybe Harvey's rules were just a self-fulfilling prophecy, a script for a mind already primed for trauma. A week after the incident on the stairs, I'm making my final log entry for the night, when a movement on the catwalk caught my eye. I looked up and my blood turned to ice. Staring at me through the window was a woman. Her face was pale, almost luminous in the twilight, framed by lank, dark hair. But it was her smile that stopped my heart. It was impossibly wide. A grotesque, predatory slash in her white face, utterly devoid of warmth or humanity. Her eyes were locked on mine, wide and unblinking. The smiling woman. Rule 6. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was paralyzed, pinned by that horrific, joyful gaze. Then, with a sound like snapping twigs, her arm bent backwards at the elbow, the bones jutting against the skin. The sight broke the spell. I scrambled backwards, tripping over my chair and landing hard on the floor. Hide under your covers and hold your breath. It was the most childish, useless instruction I could imagine. But it was all I had. I crawled to my cot, threw the thin wool blanket over my head, and pressed my face into the lumpy mattress, praying. The door creaked open. I heard a soft, shuffling sound, the drag of bare feet on the wooden floor. A low moan, A sound of anguish and hunger echoed in the small room. I felt a presence looming over me, could feel a coldness radiating down onto the blanket. I squeezed my eyes shut, my lungs burning, refusing to breathe. I could hear her breathing, a wet, ragged sound right above my head. And then, the cracking. A series of sharp, snapping sounds, as if every joint in her body was breaking and resetting. It felt like an eternity, but it could only have been seconds. Then, silence. The cold presence was gone. The door creaked shut. I lay there for a long time, shaking, taking in shuddering, silent gasps of air. I had survived. I had followed the rules, and I had survived. It was real. All of it. Harvey wasn't crazy, and I was trapped here with it. The next day I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. Every shadow was a threat, every gust of wind a whisper. I had to get out. I was packing a bag, my hands still trembling, planning to break protocol and hike out, when I heard a voice call from the base of the tower. "Hello. Is anyone up there?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I crept to the railing and looked down. A woman stood there, looking up at me. She was dressed in hiking gear, her blonde hair a mess, but she looked normal. Human. "I think I'm lost," she called up, her voice strained. "My sister. We got separated. Have you seen anyone? Have you stared at her?" My mind racing. A lost hiker. Out here. It was possible. But after the night I'd had, my trust in anything was gone. Still, she looked scared. And the paramedic in me, the part that still wanted to help, stirred faintly. "Stay there." I called down, my voice hoarse. "I'm coming down." As I descended the stairs, my hand gripping the rail, a line from Harvey's list echoed in my head. A rule I hadn't understood before. Rule 9A, if she gets in, run. Who was this woman? A victim? Or was she the reason for the rule? My feet felt like lead weights as I descended the metal staircase. Each step echoed in the unnerving silence. A countdown to a confrontation I didn't understand. The paramedic in me, the part that runs toward trouble, was at war with the terrified man who had just survived a night of impossible horrors. I kept one hand on the railing, the other gripping the handle of the fireaxe I'd grabbed from its bracket by the door. It was a poor weapon, but it was heavy, and its presence was a small, cold comfort. The woman at the bottom of the tower looked up, her face a mask of desperation. She was dressed in worn hiking gear, her blonde hair matted with sweat and grime. She was thin, almost frail, and her eyes, wide and frantic, darted from my face to the axe and back again. She looked like a victim, like someone who genuinely needed help. But after the smiling woman, after the running on the stairs, my trust in my own perception was shattered. "Thank God," she breathed as I reached the ground. "I'm Allison. My sister and I were camping. We got turned around. I can't find her. There's no one else out here," I said, my voice flat. I kept my distance. The axe held loosely at my side. "The nearest designated campsite is 20 miles from here. You're not supposed to be in this sector." Tears welled in her frantic eyes. I know, we were stupid. We went off trail. We were lost for so long. She kept saying it would be okay, that they'd find us. But they didn't. Her voice cracked, a raw, broken sound. And I got so hungry. A cold dread, entirely different from the supernatural terror of the night before, began to creep up my spine. This was a human horror, a story I recognized from my years in the city. Desperation, starvation, madness. She was always so positive, Allison continued, her gaze dropping to the dusty ground. Always smiling. But we couldn't find any food. Nothing. She looked up at me, and for a second, her frantic expression cleared, replaced by something chillingly lucid. She was looking at me, smiling, when I pushed her. I pushed her off the side of the ridge. It was a moment of weakness, of hunger. She fell so far her arms they cracked. My stomach churned. The smiling woman. The cracking joints. It couldn't be. This was a coincidence, a hallucination. My traumatized mind making connections where there were none. She wasn't moving. Allison whispered, a tear tracing a clean path through the dirt on her cheek. I was so hungry. But after I pushed her, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. She looked up, her eyes pleading for understanding. And the next day they found me. Just a day later. I felt a flicker of sympathy, a ghost of the empathy that had once defined me. A moment of madness that would define her entire life, and for nothing. But then her expression shifted again. The grief in her eyes hardened into something else. Resentment. Accusation. And then she found me. Allison whispered, her voice dropping. Who found you? I asked, my blood running cold. My sister, she said, and the last of my sympathy evaporated, replaced by pure fear. She blames you all. You didn't find her. It's your job. Our job. Instead, she found me, and I won't lose her again. As she began to walk slowly towards me, her movements stiff, unnatural. Allison, stop, I said, raising the axe. My mind was reeling. This woman was insane. The smiling woman wasn't a ghost. She was the product of this woman's guilt-ridden, starving mind. A folie deux in the wilderness, with me as the unwilling participant. We can get you help. We can get you out of here. She gets hungrier every time, Allison said, ignoring my words. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She's never satisfied anymore. There is no getting out. As she spoke, I finally understood the profound, unnatural quiet of these woods. It wasn't peace, it was absence. Then she lunged. It was a sudden, wild screech. Her arms outstretched, fingers curled into claws. Despite her frail appearance, she moved with a desperate, wary strength. Instinct took over. I sidestepped, using the axe handle to shove her away from me. She was easy to overpower, her body light and brittle. She stumbled, her foot catching on an exposed root, and for a horrifying, slow, motion moment, she was airborne. Her foot slid edge of the narrow clearing by the tower's base. She didn't scream as she fell down the steep, rocky embankment. There was just a series of sickening thuds, a final, heavy crack, and then silence. I stood gasping for breath, the axe shaking in my hands. Holy fuck. I just killed her. It was self-defense. She attacked me. She was insane, but I had killed her. The paramedic in me screamed to run to her, to check for a pulse, to render aid. But the man who had survived the smiling woman knew better. Still, I had to look. I scrambled down the embankment, my feet slipping on loose gravel. She was lying face down, about 10 feet from the tower's base. Her body was twisted at an impossible angle. Her arms, they were broken, bent backwards at the elbow. Just like the creature I'd seen outside my window. I retched, stumbling back, my mind a vortex of horror and disbelief. I had to get out. I had to run. I scrambled back up to the tower, my only thought to get to my car, to civilization, to a world where things made sense. As I ran, a fragment of our conversation echoed in my head. Something Allison had said that I'd barely registered. Harvey even worked out the 10 rules, and she still got to him eventually. I froze mid-stride. The 10 rules. I sprinted up the tower stairs, my lungs burning, and burst into the cupola. I snatched the folded piece of paper from the logbook. My shaking fingers counted them again. 1, 2, 3, 9. There were only 9 rules. What was the 10th? How had Harvey known there were 10? And if he knew all of them, how did she still get him? The sun was setting, painting the sky in bloody streaks of orange and purple. I couldn't risk hiking out in the dark. The bunker. Rule 9. Find the bunker. It was my only chance. Harvey must have used it to survive. I would grab my pack, water, and the rest of my food, and I would run for the bunker. In and out. That was the plan. I was frantically stuffing supplies into my rucksack when I heard it. A faint, familiar sound that made my blood turn to ice. Scry ape. Long, slow, quiet. The sound of fingernails on wood. Rule 7. If you hear any scratching, hide under your covers until the scratching stops. She knew. She knew I was trying to leave. I was frozen in place, trapped between the primal need to flee and the learned terror of breaking the rules. I risked a glance out the window, down into the woods directly below my tower, and I saw her. A pale white face, emerging from the black of night, illuminated by the last vestiges of twilight. Stringy, dark hair dangled around it, and that smile, that wide, sinister, impossibly joyful smile, plastered across her face. Her eyes, wide and excited, were locked with mine. I was paralyzed, pinned in place by that ecstatic, predatory gaze from the tree line below. The scratching sound was no longer just a sound. It had a face now. My mind raced, a frantic slideshow of Harvey's rules. Rule 70. If you hear any scratching, hide under your covers until it stops. But my rucksack, packed with water and food, was heavy on my back. My hand was on the door. I was already halfway to escaping. Hiding felt like a death sentence, a passive acceptance of the inevitable. She knew I was trying to leave. Then there was Rule 9A, if she gets in, run. Find the bunker. She wasn't in yet, but she was coming. The bunker was my only hope, the sanctuary Harvey had built. It was a choice between 2 commands. A conflict in the scripture of survival that Harvey had left behind. But hiding was what I had been doing my whole life. Hiding from my trauma, from my failure, from the city of ghosts. Running, at least, was an action. It was a choice, with a guttural cry that was more animal than human. I burst through the door and onto the catwalk. I didn't look down into the woods. I didn't want to see that smile again. I threw myself at the stairs, my boots clanging a frantic rhythm on the metal. I was halfway down when I heard a sickening bang from the cupola above. The sound of the door slamming open against the wall. A low, guttural moan of pure anguish and hunger echoed from the top of the tower. And then I heard it the shuffle of bare feet, the quick snapping cracks of her joints as she began her pursuit. I hit the ground and sprinted, the fire axe clutched in one hand, my pack bouncing wildly on my back. I didn't dare look behind me, but I could hear her. The shuffle of dirt and grass, the wet, ragged sound of her breathing. She was faster than I could have imagined. The path to the bunker was a narrow, winding trail I'd only glanced at on the map. In the deepening twilight, every root was a snare, every branch a grasping hand. The forest, once my escape, was now an accomplice to the horror chasing me. I saw it just as I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. A low, flat, topped rock, with a heavy iron ring set in its surface. The bunker. I dove for it, my fingers fumbling with the cold metal. I heaved, adrenaline giving me a strength I didn't know I possessed. A heavy stone panel lifted, revealing a black, gaping maw in the earth. I threw myself in, landing hard on a dirt floor, and pulled the panel shut just as I heard her shriek of fury from outside. Darkness. Absolute and suffocating. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to flick the switch. The beam cut a weak circle in the gloom, revealing a small, cramped space, no bigger than a closet. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, old fear. And on the wall, scratched into the dirt with a nail or a stone, were Harvey's last words. There are only 9 rules for survival. The 10th is for escape. She is bound here by her body. Her hunger keeps her here. So long as she remains, you can never leave. To be free, you must find what's left of her and burn it. She will not let you. She got me. Don't let her get you too. The blood drained from my face. It all clicked into place. Allison's words. There is no getting out. Harvey's abrupt retirement. This wasn't a haunting confined to a tower. It was a curse tethered to the entire forest. And I was the new prisoner. Above me, I could hear her moving, a mix of slow, confused shuffles and sudden, violent jolts. She was hunting, trapped on the outside of my tiny sanctuary. But I couldn't stay in the bunker forever. Harvey had tried to survive. I had to do what he couldn't. I had to fight. I waited until the first hint of dawn, the longest night of my life spent listening to the moans and movements of the thing outside. When the light finally came, the sound stopped. I took a deep breath, grabbed my pack, now containing a lighter and a small canister of kerosene I'd found in Harvey's emergency supplies, and pushed open the stone door. The forest was quiet, but it was a predatory silence now. I pulled out my map. Allison had said she pushed her sister from a ridge. There was only one significant ridge in my sector, about 2 miles north of the tower. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. The hike was a nightmare of paranoia. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. I felt her presence everywhere, a constant, oppressive weight. It took me 2 hours to find the ridge. I followed its edge, my eyes scanning the steep drop below. And then I saw it, a patch of disturbed earth, and below it, a dark opening in the rock face, almost completely hidden by overgrown brush. A small cave. My heart hammered in my chest. I scrambled down the treacherous slope, the loose rock sliding under my feet. The entrance to the cave was small, a thin, tunnel-like structure. I switched on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The air inside was cold and smelled of decay. I moved slowly, my axe held ready, my light dancing over the damp rock walls. And then I saw it. In the back of the cave, there was a small bundle. As I got closer, I realized it was a backpack. Harvey's. Allison's. I didn't know. Then my light fell on what was next to it. It was the body of a woman, desiccated and twisted. Her hiking clothes were rotted. Her limbs bent at the same impossible angles as Allison's had been. But the face, even in death, the skin stretched taut over the skull. The mouth was pulled back in a wide, grotesque, joyful smile. I nearly threw up. This was it. The source. The anchor of the curse. I fumbled in my pack for the kerosene, my hands slick with sweat. I doused the body, the chemical smell overpowering the stench of death. I pulled out the lighter. My thumb flicked the wheel. Once. Twice. Nothing. A quick, snapping crack out from the mouth of the cave. I spun around, my flashlight beam finding her. She was standing there, blocking the only exit. But she was different now. More solid. Her eyes, locked with mine, burned with a black, ancient hatred. Her smile grew wider, stretching the pale skin of her face until it seemed it would tear. Her arms began to break, snapping backwards at the elbows with jolting, unnatural movements, the bones jutting against the skin. With every crack, she took a shuffling step closer. She lunged, a silent, terrifying blur of motion. I swung the axe, not as a weapon, but as a shield, pushing her back. She was impossibly strong. I stumbled backwards, tripping over the backpack and landing beside the kerosene-soaked corpse. She was on me, her face inches from mine, that horrific smile filling my vision. I could feel a deathly cold radiating from her, a cold that had nothing to do with the cave. My hand, still clutching the lighter, was pinned beneath me. With my last ounce of strength, I twisted my wrist, jamming my thumb against the flint wheel. Flick, a spark. Another. On the third try, a tiny flame bloomed, fragile and precious in the suffocating darkness. I thrust my hand forward, touching the flame to the soaked rags of her corpse. It erupted, a whoosh of fire and heat that threw the smiling woman back. She shrieked, a sound that wasn't one voice but a dozen, a chorus of pain and rage that seemed to tear at the very air in the cave. Her form flickered, thinning like smoke, her features distorting in the firelight. As the flames consumed her physical remains, her spectral form was pulled apart, dissolving into nothingness until all that was left was the roar of the fire and the echo of that final, terrible scream. I lay there, gasping, my face illuminated by the pyre I had created. When the flames finally died down to embers, I crawled out of the cave and into the morning sun. The forest was different. The oppressive silence was gone. I could hear birds singing, the wind rustling through the pines. It was just a forest again, I didn't go back to the tower. I left the axe, the rucksack, everything. I just walked. I walked until I hit a service road. And then I kept walking until I saw the distant glint of a car. I was no longer Oscar Vance, fire lookout. I was just a man who had walked out of the woods, leaving the ghosts behind me in the ashes.